Hey, Zaka family! Zaka is launching an exclusive membership platform to provide you with career development workshops, coaching, community, and so much more. Go to ZakaConnect.com and sign up to receive information on how to access early registration and perks. Hello, everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform. You can get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Cindu Thomas-George. Cindu, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure's all ours, Cindu. I know I have a lot of things to ask you, but I want to start off by just where exactly are you from, and a little bit more of your cultural background.
Yeah, so I live in the city of Chicago in Ukrainian village, and ethnically I am Indian, so South Indian. My parents immigrated from Kerala, India, in the early 1970s, and so I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and now I'm living in the city.
Mm-hmm. And then your parents, could you talk a little bit more about where your parents are from, for the individuals on
Yeah,
listening right now?
sure. Yeah. So Kerala is the southernmost part of India, and it's kind of like the Hawaii of India. Very beautiful, very lush. We're from a village. So my parents, they didn't come from a lot. They didn't have, much, but the education was a big priority, in their families. And so my mom went to nursing school in India, and that's how she came to America through a nursing visa. And my dad came to America on a student visa. So he studied at DePaul for a couple of years. But Kerala is a really unique part of India because we have Muslim, Christian, and Hindu people all living together, and typically that's not the case. And we also have the highest literacy rate, I think, in the world. Actually,
Wow.
you could fact check that. Yeah, so people know how to read there. But yeah, so that's a little bit of where I'm from.
Oh, okay, okay. So it's very diverse when you mention about the various different denominations. It
Yeah.
seems like a very diverse place as well too.
Yeah, we're all Indian, but the diversity really comes from the different religions.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I actually grew up Catholic, so we are a minority. I think 3% of Indians are Christian, and so I'm in that minority.
Okay, okay. Now, what was childhood like growing up for you? How
Oh,
was that?
I would say it's pretty painful. Looking back at it, I didn't have a great childhood. We were the only family of color for several years, one of the only immigrant families. There was a couple of Polish immigrant families, but because of that, I experienced a lot of unfortunate xenophobia and racism from the really early age of 5. So,
Wow, 5.
directly, yeah, kindergarten, actually. And my
Yeah.
name is Sindhu and it rhymes with Hindu. So there was a lot of teasing, Sindhu the Hindu. I got bullied pretty bad, and so I feel like I didn't have a very strong sense of self. I really learned to feel ashamed of my Indianness and my difference. And it took me many years to unlearn that. So I would say my childhood wasn't a very happy childhood. At the same time, I was a daughter of immigrants who were raising children without any support, and in a country that they knew nothing about. So you have the struggles of children raised by immigrants there. So it's just I would say it was more difficult than I would have liked it to be, but still very loved, and I'm grateful for the childhood that I did have.
Mhm. Now, I could only imagine, being in the middle of both worlds, being an immigrant child, having your parents of one culture, but then you're adapting to a new culture within the school system and what's going on over there. What were some of the insecurities that you developed at a young age?
Oh God, so much. I mean, just, when you're living in a world of whiteness, you learn to kind of succumb to that. And so I always wanted to be more white, less Indian. So everything from my nose and my skin color, my name. So basically just a lot of insecurity. I changed my name from Sindhu to Cindy in 6th grade because the bullying was so bad. And my
Wow.
friend was just like, why don't you just call yourself Cindy? And so I did that, and I was Cindy for a long time until I was like 20. probably 4, I went by the name Cindy. I never legally changed it, but I introduced myself, and my college degrees are in Cindy, and my husband met me as Cindy.
My
So
college degrees in Cindy.
yeah,
Wow.
like and then I changed it back when I was at the end of grad school, reading. I have a master's degree in intercultural communication. And so I was reading, about whiteness theory and critical theory. And I was just realizing what I did and how I was really succumbing and denying my authentic identity. So I would say lots of insecurities in a lot of ways.
And how did you deal with those insecurities? Like, what made you stronger? Like, how did you pull up during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I had a really good coping mechanism. My parents, they didn't really know, they didn't grow up in America, so they didn't have the capital, the understanding of how to help us navigate. So I don't know if I coped with it really well. One thing that I definitely was to stand up for myself and to not be afraid to
Sure.
speak up, because when you're bullied from 5, you have eventually you learn to have your voice. And so that's something that's really helped me in my life and in my career, and just has made me a stronger person.
Mm-mm. Now, thinking back when you were a kid, what was like your vision of yourself in your dreams? Like, what did you
Yeah.
want to be?
I didn't know that I wanted to have the career that I had until I was in college. But when I was younger, I think my only dream was just to be accepted, right? To be liked. And that's really what I really strive for, was just to be accepted and to be looked at like everybody else, right? And
Mm,
that really led me to practicing self-hate and even internalized depression, right? Because when you're not accepted and you're trying to be someone you can never be, you start to really look down on yourself. So I think it was just really to be accepted. And then when I was in college, I took an intercultural communication class, and it kind of changed my life, because it was the first time that I was able to take theory and take what I was learning in school and apply it to my life directly. And so, intercultural communication is a study of how culture influences the ways that you communicate. And so, just thinking about the struggles that my parents and my family had, being immigrants, it really helped put a lot of made sense of it and shed light on it. And even there was theories around some of the things that I experienced. And so that really made me realize, like, wow, and it helped me evolve. And so I wanted to do that
mm.
for other people. So that's when I started to want to be a professor. And I eventually went to grad school and got my master's in intercultural communication so that I could teach college level courses.
Mm. I like the flow of that. Obviously, you went through some things to get to where you are, but you definitely are in that place now. Now, throughout this time frame, like, who was like your biggest inspiration to get you through this all?
Yeah.
Like, you're dealing with you talking about kindergarten. That's a pretty young age, and to understand, big words like that, discrimination, racism at the age of 5, when you're
Yeah.
just trying to understand your colors and numbers, like, who was your inspiration to pull you through this?
Interestingly enough, it was friends that really helped me to get kind of through that, and to see that the good in who I was. And, so it's not like I didn't have friends, right? I had a couple of really close friends. And one of my closest friends in life, her name is Claudia. She always helped me to kind of push through the hard stuff and to kind of evolve. And also, she was the daughter of immigrants, but she was a Polish, immigrant. So she had white skin. She was a little bit more accepted than I was. And so she kind of helped me navigate just everyday things, right? Just things that my parents wouldn't know how to help me navigate, like social etiquette and, boys and all that kind of stuff. So I would say
Mhm.
friends helped me a lot. But then also, overall, I think, I have 4 main forces in my life that really inspire me. And it was my parents is one, my mom's dad, and then my dad's mom. So I'll start with my grandpa on my mom's side. He was a teacher, and he was the only, educator in our family until I became an educator. And I mentioned we're from a rural village, very simple life. And so teachers are really respected. And so he just approached everything through a teaching lens. And he was a really big inspiration for me. He showed me unconditional love. And he lived in India my whole life. He only lived in America for a few years, but he would write me letters and give me insight and wisdom. And so he was really a big inspiration. And one of the reasons I pursued teaching as well. Um, And my dad's mom is, very bold Indian woman, speaks her mind. She's still alive. She's 91. Indian women are expected to succumb to sexism and the patriarchal system. Um, that is what Indian culture is. And it's rare for someone of her age to be so loud and bold and go to the beat of her own drum. So she really never looks to please other people. And I was, I think that I'm very much like her. I realized that later on in life. I was always expected to conform to the norm. And, if you're a woman, you stand behind the man. But I never did that. And I realized how much I am like my grandma. Amachi is the name, the
Hmm.
word in my language for grandma. So my Amachi is my hero. And I'm so lucky to have her at 91 years old. And then
Okay, shout out to that. Come on, 91. Let's go.
91, yeah, she's amazing and she's still healthy and hope she's around for a little longer. But yeah, I'm very blessed to have a grandparent still alive. And then my parents, my parents, their work ethic, their resilience, their selflessness. My dad is 70, I don't know, 4 or 5. He still works every day, and he didn't they didn't you think about immigrants who are coming here in the 70s. They didn't have an infrastructure built. They didn't have community. They would have to drive hours to just go to get Indian groceries. They didn't have the support system that many immigrants coming here today do. So I just respect that entire generation, but especially my parents. They just worked so hard for all of their family to come from India to America. My parents sponsored all of their siblings. My dad has 6 siblings and my mom has 7, and they sponsored all of them and their families. And so that meant that they had to work extra hard to make money. That money wasn't going to us, it was going to India so that they could come over to America, right? So they
Mhm.
really are the example of selflessness and unconditional love for your family. And so they've taught me that, and especially work ethic. All me and my siblings are very, very, career driven, and we have a work ethic that I would say is unmatched by many. So
I do like the fact that this team that you've built. I think that's something that I'm hearing from your parents to your grandparent to your siblings. It definitely is a team effort in order to get through things like that.
yeah.
Now, I know at a young age you mentioned about the whole thing about discrimination and bullying as a child. Could you give us an example of of that and how you actually overcame that obstacle?
Hmm. Yeah, like there was just so many instances, like from physical, like kids throwing rocks at you, to spitting at you and the teachers never saying anything. And I'm in my 40s, so this is a long time ago in a white suburb, and maybe they weren't equipped to deal with it. But I guess I'll talk really specifically about my name, because that's a really integral part of your identity. And being called Cindu the Hindu was just mortifying. And I walked into 6th grade, changed my name, and thinking that that would help and that would make me accepted. And I would say it helped a lot, right, in high school and even in college. But in reality, when I changed my name in junior high, the teasing still never went away. And I remember one year, the whole cafeteria started singing happy birthday to me. And for a second, I was pleasantly surprised, like, oh, what's going on? And then I realized that they were all singing it so they could say happy birthday to Sindhu the Hindu. And
Wow.
that was after a few years after I had changed my name. And I just remember feeling so distraught, like, oh my God, like I'll never be able to get past this. And, that really resulted in a lot of white adjacent behaviors and white centering that a lot of Black and Indigenous people of color resort to, right? And sometimes it's a
Mhm.
survival technique, sometimes it's because they want to fit in. And I didn't really find myself until I reclaimed my name, right? And I was in grad school, like I said, and just like I walked into 6th grade and said, "My name is Cindy," I walked into the first day of being a teaching assistant for my graduate advisor, and he had known my story because I was writing about it in my thesis, and I just told him, "Please introduce me as Sindhu," and then I just kind of like, just like I went to Cindy, I went back to Sindhu. So I would say how I got overcame it is really a lot of education, and studying and understanding things like whiteness theory, and that this wasn't necessarily my fault. This is that we live in a world that is omnipresent, right? Whiteness is omnipresent, it's everywhere. And so you have to
Mhm.
be aware of it in order to kind of deflect it. So I would say I got past it through embracing my name and slowly embracing my identity and unlearning the shame that I had learned for so many years to have.
Mm. And I'm glad you mentioned the whole thing about education. I feel like, a lot of the guests that have been on the show previously, they said that a lot of their struggle that they went through at their earlier point in their career, a way that they kind of overcame that was through education. And
Hmm.
one of the last guests was like, you can't. He was like an accountant. He was like, you can't discriminate on the numbers. The numbers are numbers, right? So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, you know what? That makes perfect sense. There's and you went through a lot, and you could have easily, kind of given up
Hmm.
at some point in time, and you found a way through that. You found a way through, your family helping you out. Did you even have a mentor at some point?
I didn't, which is really sad. I didn't have a mentor. I would say my graduate advisor, maybe, but he was supposed to do that because he was advising me. But I never really had kind of a mentor, per se. And that's really why I go out of my way to mentor other people. I think I would have gotten where I am in my career and just in my life a lot sooner if I had someone showing me the ropes. But I unfortunately did not have a mentor.
Mhm. Yeah, well, you definitely made it happen. I think whether it be your parents were the mentors or your grandparent
Yep.
he was the
Yeah.
mentor. Now, where did you receive your bachelor's from, and why did you even choose that major?
Yeah, so I'm the second person to go to college in my family, the first girl, and because I'm a daughter of Indian immigrants, they didn't really give me much option. So I was to go where my brother went. So I went to Western Illinois University, and it is in Macomb, Illinois, and I majored in social work. And it was a struggle. My dad didn't want me to major in social work, but I was set on that because I really wanted to just help other people who struggled like I did. So I have a service oriented kind of framework and mindset. And so social work was something that I wanted to do, and I studied it. I did it. I actually worked for a social worker for a year, and then I realized that I was more interested in helping my clients than they were, and I got really disempowered. So I went to grad school at San Francisco State University, and I got my master's in communication studies. And that program taught you how to teach college. So I did that, and I focused on intercultural communication.
Hmm. Now, you mentioned about when you about the college, the university, grad school. When you finished school, like what was the first job? Like what was some of the lessons you learned on that first job?
Yeah, I'll talk about first. My first real job was teaching college, right? I did social work, but I only did it for like less than 6 months and I quit. So I can't say I had too much.
Was there a reason for that?
You
You just
know,
didn't like
the
it
place that
anymore?
the place that I worked was very toxic, and
Okay.
I was being treated horribly, and I was making very little money. And then, like I said, I didn't think that job was going to give me the ability and the pathways to really help others because I was really going into people's homes and checking up on them, and there were people who were on welfare and people who were recovering from drugs and really dealing with a lot of situations that I was not prepared to help them with, right? I had an undergrad in social work. Like they needed to really be working with people who are psychologists and people who could really help. So I walked away from that career feeling really disempowered, but also knowing that I wanted to be an educator. I wanted to teach college. So, my first job, I was at San Francisco State, City College of San Francisco. And one thing about me is I struggled a lot, but one thing I never struggled with was a career. Like I got a job right away. I was good at what I did. It fit. I loved it. I was fueled by it. I was empowered by my job. And so I didn't have a lot of hardships. However, in the first, year or two of teaching, I had to learn a lot, right? And so the one thing that I learned is that um, you have to watch your back because there's always going to be haters and you have to advocate for yourself. So, being a young woman of color, I was 25 the first year I was teaching full time. I was teaching several adjunct jobs at different colleges. So, my parents, they never had, my dad worked at a gas station, he owns gas stations and convenience stores. And so I didn't really have someone telling me how to navigate a system, right? A business system. So I had to learn that. One time I didn't check my work email because my boss was emailing me through my personal email. So that's just how we talked. And well, once you're an employee of the college, you have to check your work email and you have to use the internal systems, which I didn't even know.
True.
and they were trying to get a hold of me and thought I didn't want the job. So she eventually called me saying, "Why aren't you checking your email? You're supposed to do that as an employee." And so I didn't even have that basic awareness to do that, right? So lots of learning, I think, just being who I was, not having anyone direct me. But also, I had people who were kind of trying to backstab me, and people who might have been threatened by me, other adjuncts. So when you're an adjunct, the goal is to be a full-time faculty member. So
That's
you're
true.
trying to you're trying to one up each other, and you're trying to impress the department chair. And so I had another adjunct that actually threatened to sue the college because of an assignment that I was using. And a little backstory: we were in grad school together, and one of the classes we took was preparing us to teach college. So every week we would create assignments based off of chapters, and the teacher had said, "This is all you can use, all of this when you teach." So I was a couple years into my career, but I was still using some of the materials, and one of it was from that class that she had produced, but I thought I had permission to use. And so she called the bookstore, she threatened to sue the college, and it was really scary for me, being a young person, but realized later that she was clearly intimidated by me, right? And she was trying to get me off of the teaching roster. So I learned really early on that you have to advocate for yourself, use your voice, and not just sit back and let other people walk all over you.
Mm. Wow. Even after all of that, they're still coming for you.
Oh, well, when
Still,
you're a woman
still
of
coming for
color,
you.
higher education is a predominantly white field, right? So
Still.
ageism, sexism, elitism, all of that is real.
But it goes to show you who you are as a person, right? Again, and you could take all these opportunities, well, not even opportunities, I'm saying you could take all these experiences and turn them into something negative, right? But never in any of the stories that you've mentioned to me did I hear you retaliate in a negative way. Right, and I think
No,
that takes a lot for someone to just sit there and take those types of beatings, but still put forth their best foot forward. So it speaks a lot about the character you are. Your parents have done a phenomenal job, and obviously your community to help you get to where you are. Because especially, as an immigrant, in a sense, or coming from immigrant parents, like the word struggle is a common word in a household in a sense, right? And you get
yeah,
to a place in your life where you're like, I finally have an opportunity to do something for myself, and I'm here because I'm supposed to be here. But the
yeah,
struggle is still there because some individuals are very ignorant. They just don't want you to succeed,
yeah,
and you know it. And you still have to kind of like smile a little bit, keep walking forward,
yeah,
knowing that they are throwing rocks or they
yeah.
are, behind closed doors talking bad about you. Now I know that you're a professor of
Mhm.
communication studies, and you also are a founder of your own company. Like, how do you even find a balance to do all these things on top of just being with your family?
Yeah, I don't. I think that balance is bullshit. If I can say that on your show,
No, you
I
good,
think
you good.
that I think it's really hard to find balance, and something has to give, right? Like I do a lot. I'm like you said, I have a boutique consulting firm. I'm a full-time tenured professor. I have a couple of organizations. I have two kids, and so it's prioritizing what's important. And so I think that I always struggle with finding balance. But one thing I've realized, in my 20-year career is that something has to give, right? And so one of the things that I gave up a long time ago is watching any kind of TV, because I just don't have the time. And I feel sad that I don't, sit there and have that self-care. But it's just I don't have the ability to sit down and get into shows or watch shows. And so time is really, really precious, and there's a very little of it. So I think that it's hard. And right now I have two young children, and my husband is a primary cook in our house because I have two careers, right? So I would love to be the one that is making the food for my children every single day, and for them to be coming home to mama's cooking, right? But that's not the case.
Mhm.
It's my husband who does it. And so you have to kind of sacrifice some of those things to do the work that you were put on this earth to do. So that's
And could you, with that being said, you say that how are you balancing your company? Talk to us a little bit more about like the business, you being a founder. Who inspired you to launch your company, and like how are you helping organizations and employees?
yeah. I mean, I would say my inspiration to launch Shakti Diversity and Equity Training really came from when I was teaching and realizing, well, this information is so important and it's so needed in the workplace, right? And back then, this is about 18 years ago, the field of DEI didn't really exist. I mean, it existed, but it wasn't called diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so I knew that there was a need for this. And so I just, started. I have an entrepreneurial kind of mindset. My father, my grandfather, come from a long line of entrepreneurs. So I would say my probably a little bit of my lineage and it's in my DNA, but just knowing the need for that.
And how are you helping employees and businesses,
Yeah.
organizations?
So the main way I do a couple of different things. One is professional development. So I create and I facilitate training to help cultivate more inclusive, equitable, anti-racist, and interculturally intelligent workplaces. So I do, trainings, and so sometimes it's 75 people, sometimes it's more, but companies pay me to provide education around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And everyone is dealing with retention. A lot of people are leaving. There's a great resignation that's happening where more people are leaving their workplaces than we've ever seen in the history of our company. And one of the ways that you keep them there is creating an inclusive environment where you feel a sense of welcome and belonging, right? And so that's really one of the goals of DEI. And then I also do coaching, and I coach executives. I coach, chief diversity officers who might not be up to speed just because I have a wealth of knowledge and awareness in this field. And then I work with infrastructure. I help organizations make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of the infrastructure or the DNA of an organization. So everything from helping to launch diversity councils to looking at policies around hiring, firing, bereavement policies, maternity leave, to make sure that they're equitable for their employees.
Now, do you work at a lot of the schools and universities?
Yeah, I do. I have clients across the board. I would say that I do work with colleges. However, I do most of the work with corporations, marketing companies. One of my big clients right now is a physical therapy company that has like 200 locations nationwide. I work in finance. I work with startup and venture capitalists and private equity firms. So everything from education to mental health to, private equity. I
Mm.
think DEI is important. It needs to be in every corner of every industry. So I like to have the challenge of working in new industries because I learn a lot and it's very fulfilling.
Mhm. Now, I know some of your training is around like the intercultural communication. You know, what are some of like the disconnects that immigrant employees might face, like working in traditional corporate America nowadays?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the United States is a very individualistic country, right? So there's these two very variables called individualism and collectivism. And 70% of the world's population comes from a collectivist culture. And basically, what that means is individualist societies really value the I before the we, right? So we're thinking about ourselves before we think about the group. And collectivist societies are opposite. They value the we before the I. And that really influences everything from how you look at your colleagues to how you interact in the workplace to how you deal with conflict, to how you communicate. And so I think one of the struggles and the challenges of immigrants and even children of immigrants, the disconnect is that we're not aware that our upbringing and our kind of just way of being is really different than how US American workplaces work, right? So I
Right.
think another thing is that business culture in the United States is really steeped with white dominant norms, white cultural dominant norms, right? So there's a whole, article and a whole website and a whole movement talking about white supremacy culture in the workplace and kind of de disrupting that, right? Because if you are an immigrant coming from Ghana or an immigrant coming from China or even, Poland, you're not going to be understanding the ways of communication and the norms because people are not all raised by white dominant families. And so I think that
Yeah.
workplaces need to evolve, and that's part of the work that I do with organizations is help them understand that white dominant norms are not the right and only one way. There's different ways of being and communicating, and we can't expect everyone to have our ways of communicating because that's just not the reality of a globalized workplace.
And I'm glad you're hitting on that because that's very important. At corporate America started off a certain type of way, right? And as time progressed, people started to make a significant amount of money doing this stuff, and they said, you know what works? Let's not break the system, right? But then they want diversity in their businesses. They want more different cultures and different individuals coming in there, all walks of life. But then they're not willing to change some of those habits
Mhm.
that might worked 30, 40, 50 years ago, and not opening the door for the new generation, right,
Mhm.
of the business. And if they do, which I've heard do a lot of the interviews, they do it in a very small way. They're like, okay, well, we're gonna give you guys a diversity group to do some diverse things once a month.
Yep.
It's not the same as adding it as it's like the one day on the calendar versus
Mhm.
the month,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
we we
going.
call that we call that food flags and fun diversity, initiatives like that are just focused on celebrations and fun, and let's talk about, you know, our cultural traditions. That's not going to evolve a culture of a company, right? You're looking for culture change in order to create an inclusive environment for immigrants and people of color.
Mm, mhm. Now we're on that topic. I know you wrote something that it definitely caught my eye about the whole thing about diversity and inclusion. Something along the lines of like diversity is being like invited to a party, inclusion is just being, asked to dance. Like, could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the original quote is actually by a Black thought leader, Verna Myers, and it's a quote that many people have heard. She put out in 2013, and she said that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And, I think that we're ready to evolve from that because if we just stop at asking our, historically underrepresented employees to dance, we're going to fall short at inclusion. So I add on to her quote, and I think that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is not just being asked to dance, it's being asked to help choreograph that dance. And so if you haven't got it yet, the party is the organization, and the dance is what's happening in your organization. That's the metaphor that
Mhm,
Berna is using. So, I think that it's so important that we invite people to use their voice, right? And to, ask them for their insights and help them to choreograph the organizational success, not just ask them to dance one time because it happens at the end of a song when you're dancing with somebody.
you
Usually,
walk away.
usually
It's
you
over.
walk away and the dance ends, right? And so that's kind of
Mhm,
what happens in the workplace. Our historically underrepresented employees, our immigrants, our people of color, our LGBTQ plus identity folks, our veterans, our people with disabilities, they leave when they don't feel included or a sense of belonging, right? And so I
mhm,
think it's really important for organizations to consider how can we incorporate everyone's voice and insight in some ways, right? Not just the people who are at the executive level, people who are sitting at the table. And that helps us to really feel a sense of belonging and inclusion.
mm. Now, what does diversity and inclusion should mean to a company culture then?
Well, a lot of people are very laser focused on diversity and metrics and numbers. So if you pay attention to Facebook or any of these big tech companies, they do diversity reporting, which is an accountability measure. And they'll say, oh, we have like 3% African American employees and 2% women and so and so. And that's actually not where we need to stop with diversity because once you get those people in your organization, how are you going to keep them there? And
Mm,
that's where the
true,
inclusion
true.
the inclusion part is. And so I do a lot of inclusion work and I focus my work really on inclusion. There are lots of things that you can do, strategies, organizational strategies, interpersonal strategies. But the one thing that people don't realize is inclusion is an intentional action. It's not just something that happens, right? Not everybody is naturally inclusive. That's just not how we are wired as humans, right? Especially in the workplace. So inclusion is an intentional action and belonging is the goal and the feeling of that you want to get from your inclusive, activities and strategies.
Mm, okay, okay. And I do like that quote, going back to that about the whole, because I do have a connection to dance, and I like the fact of diversity and the inclusion, but being asked to choreograph, right? That's a big thing because like you said, getting invited to a company, getting as an immigrant, you're like, wow, I just got hired by one of the largest companies, right? That you're
Mhm.
excited, you're just like getting an invitation, right? But then being asked to be a part of a team in there and actually take a leadership role is the next step. But some
Yeah.
people just don't get that opportunity. right? But
Yeah.
being a part of a large brand, of a large company, some people rather just they don't speak up because they've made it to a place where they're like, I would have never had this opportunity.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, when it comes down to like a lot of our guests in the past, a lot of them talked about, the challenges of branding themselves at work and, not wanting to be seen as cocky, but they wanted to be recognized for their achievements. Why do you think most immigrants feel that way? And how could like we navigate through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think branding means you have to kind of be proud and brag a little bit about who you are, right? And be confident. And as immigrants and children of immigrants, we hold on to these ideologies of modesty and humbleness, right? And branding is really the opposite of that, I think. So I think it's not natural for a lot of people. We have to get past that kind of socialization of be modest, be humble, don't talk about how awesome you are. At least that's kind of the messages that I've always received. And when you're branding yourself, you're telling people about how great you are and how great your service is, right? So that's why I think that immigrants kind of struggle with that.
Hmm. And now, what are some of the things that you feel like they could do to kind of help with that struggle?
I think, just realizing that, well, if you're an entrepreneur, you're not gonna get anywhere unless you communicate the value of what you offer, right? So, no one's gonna know your amazingness unless you are the one. You have to advocate for yourself. If you don't believe that you are good at what you do, no one's gonna believe it, right? So,
Mm, okay. And something through our conversation that I could feel your passion from your writing, you being an educator. Now, where does this all come from? And ultimately, like, what do you want people to get after like listening to you, learning from you? What is like the main thing you want them to walk away with?
yeah, I mean, in my teaching, I use lots of personal examples. I use, real life incidents, and I think my passion for educating other people is that I think knowledge is power, right? You don't know what you don't know, and you can evolve and grow so much from learning. So I think, just knowing the transformational nature of education is what makes me passionate about teaching. And then, specifically what people can learn from me is a lot, depending on what I'm teaching. But I think everyone has a story to share and everyone makes mistakes. And the beauty of that, the beauty of life is that you learn from, your stories, you learn from other people's stories. And so that's really what I want people to learn is, learn from the hardships and some of the pain and the struggles of being on the wrong side of inclusion, which is exclusion, right? And do better.
Mhm. Okay. Now, when it's one of the biggest things that I've asked a lot of the guests on the show, I would say like, what is that legacy you want to leave? Like, what is that? What do you see it as when you
Yeah.
look back at all this?
Huh, that's a good question. I really strive in everything that I do to be an agent of change for good. So I think, I want people to remember that I was an agent of change who worked tirelessly towards cultivating an inclusive society and refused to stand on the wrong side of right.
And the fact that you take on that responsibility every single day is a big thing.
Yeah.
It's not like and through all your previous things where you were bullied, you definitely showcase that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
You know
wanna
you
I wanna
went left.
highlight that it's not like there's no cost, right? Like I persevered through it, but there is a tax, a penalty that you have to pay, and that's mental health, right? So,
Mhm.
dealing with depression, anxiety, all of those things really stem from my childhood experiences and the experiences that I've had in the workplace that were oppressive. So, I don't want people to listen to this and say, "Oh, she's so strong." Yes, I'm strong. I went through stuff, but I still have to pay that price of, having to deal with and live with anxiety and depression, in my life. And so working with a therapist, realizing kind of where did this stem from has helped a lot, but it's a lifelong journey, right?
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the whole thing about like the therapist and that working through like mental health. That's a very big thing. One of the previous guests, she talked about that and really just emphasized that that's a very big component in regard to someone's growth. Being
Hmm.
able to speak up, being able to acknowledge where they need help with, and a lot of it sometimes is that mental thing. So before we conclude on our interview for this today, Cindy, is there any last words you want to share with our guests?
Yeah, I guess my parting words would be that, change starts with you and with us, and we can't change the world unless we impact our families and our local communities. And so start, if you're looking to create social change and social impact and make a more inclusive society, start with your own families, right? Start with your own communities, your own friends.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you for sharing all that. Again, Cindy, your story is very inspirational. Being at the age of 5, seeing and witnessing firsthand, discrimination and seeing how it has, could have taken left a toll with you, but you actually still went forth on a positive note. And I like the fact that you emphasized the whole thing about a team, your family, growing up and having a strong family, a strong group of people that are centered and grounded. And you definitely highlighted the whole thing about education and about how education is definitely very valuable. The more you educate yourself, the more you potentially will be able to speak up for yourself, which in turn could hopefully get you those opportunities. So, Sindhu, I appreciate you greatly. I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks. I'm so glad that you had me.
Mm. And to the listeners, if you want to hear more inspirational stories like Sindhu, please check us out on ZakaConnect.com. Follow our social at Zaka Connect or follow our feed, Zaka, wherever you listen to your podcast.